Friday, 22nd September 2017, at Liverpool Crown Court. The corridors were silent as 19 men waited to hear their fate. They had spent 6 years flooding towns and cities across Britain with drugs, as well as mocked officers during routine stops, filming them, shouting abuse, convinced they were untouchable. But this wasn't the only case closing in on Liverpool's underworld. 4 years earlier, on the 15th of October 2013, Dutch police had forced their way into a small cafe in Rotterdam. Behind the locked door, investigators uncovered a meeting place where international cocaine plots were quietly arranged. Some of the men inside escaped that day and spent years on the run, one hiding in plain sight across Europe, another vanishing into Dubai's shadows. Two very different stories, but together they reveal how Liverpool's criminal networks operated on both a local and global scale, and how investigators refused to let either empire stand. This is the story of a county line gang that reigned for 6 years, and the fugitives tied to an international cartel, and how both were finally brought down. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Between 2010 and 2016, a network of dealers operating out of Anfield in Liverpool built an empire that would spread across the country. At the centre were 3 names that became familiar to detectives: Edward Murphy, Jamie Jarvis, and Stephen Harrison. They weren't sophisticated strategists or quiet operators. Their methods were brash, violent, and obvious to anyone who lived near them. But for 6 years, they dominated the trade. From their base in Anfield, their supply lines pushed deep into other parts of the UK. Lancashire, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, Devon and Cornwall all felt the impact. What began as a local operation soon turned into a model that mirrored what would later be recognised nationally as county lines. The gang's reach was sustained by regular supplies of high-purity cocaine and heroin. Their source was Francis Fearon, who could provide product at purities as high as 88%. Once cut down, it became cheap street deals that could flood an area quickly. This was the foundation of their power: move in fast, overwhelm local demand, and dominate before smaller groups could resist. But their control wasn't built on supply alone. Violence was never far away. The 3 leaders were known for intimidation and for making sure rivals were either pushed out or silenced. For communities, the sudden influx was unmistakable. Streets once quiet were now lined with new faces. For 6 years, Murphy, Jarvis, and Harrison believed they had found a gap in the market and filled it. The reality was that they had pioneered a ruthless model of expansion, one that would shape the county lines crisis across Britain. Behind the gang's expansion was a tactic that became one of the hallmarks of county lines: exploitation. The men at the top rarely set foot in the towns where they pushed their trade. Instead, they relied on vulnerable people, addicts, teenagers, and children, barely old enough to understand what they were being drawn into. One of their methods was known as cuckooing. It was simple and cruel. A vulnerable addict, often living alone, would be approached and offered free drugs in exchange for a place to stay. Once inside, the gang's dealers would take over the home. Within days, it was no longer the addict's address. It was a base of operations, a hub where products could be stored, cut, and sold. The addict was left trapped, used as a host, and paid in just enough heroin or crack to keep the arrangement in place. From these homes, the network expanded further. Dealers could arrive in a new town and almost overnight build a presence that was hard to dislodge. But it wasn't only addicts. Teenagers, some under 16, were pulled into the operation. Their age made them less suspicious to police, and their vulnerability made them easy to control. One case stood out. In Darwen, Lancashire, one teenager became a stark example of how vulnerable children were drawn into the gang's world, and how quickly they could become targets. He had been recruited to run drugs, travelling back and forth between Liverpool and nearby towns. His age meant he attracted less suspicion, but it also left him dangerously exposed. Before long, whispers began to spread. Other members suspected he had spoken to police. One older member turned on him, launching a terrifying chase through Darwin's streets. Locals later described the scene as frantic, the boy running for his life, pursued by men determined to punish what they believed was betrayal. Panicked, he managed to reach a hotel, running inside to escape. In the meantime, he made a desperate phone call, pleading for help. On the line, his voice shook as he explained that a group was outside. He feared he would be stabbed if he stepped back out. His words gave police a chilling insight into the pressure these children faced. Exploitation wasn't a side effect of the gang's business model. It was the core of it, and all of it was used to protect a network that thrived on other people's misery. For Edward Murphy and his closest associates, the rewards of the trade were worn on their sleeves. While their dealers worked the streets, Murphy cruised around Liverpool in a brand new Range Rover that cost the gang £6,000 a month to hire. It was a statement vehicle valued at over £100,000, impossible to miss in the neighbourhoods where he lived. Days after passing his driving test, he was seen behind the wheel of an Audi worth £40,000, another symbol of how quickly drug money turned into status. The flash wasn't limited to cars. Rolex watches adorned the wrists of key members, each one treated like a badge of achievement. Designer clothes, expensive hotels, champagne bottles cracked open in nightclubs. It all served the same purpose: to project success, to show the world that they were untouchable. On social occasions, the gang would order magnums of champagne, pouring freely while associates filmed on their phones. But Murphy's extravagance reached stranger places too. He had a fascination with fireworks. Police who raided properties later found hundreds of them stockpiled, enough to put on city-sized displays. He was known to set them off from rooftops in the centre of Liverpool, bursts of colour above the skyline, paid for entirely by drug profits. To him, it was a spectacular way of flaunting power in plain sight. Yet for those living alongside the gang, the contrast could not have been sharper. Behind the Rolexes and champagne, the reality was fear. Violence became a regular feature, reminders of what happened when territory was challenged. Intimidation spilled from backstreets into everyday life. Even police officers faced open abuse. We will talk about it in a few minutes. For Murphy and his crew, money came in fast and was blown just as quickly. There was no laundering, no attempt to disguise the profits. Every penny was flaunted. By 2015, the gang's arrogance was impossible to miss. Hiding in the shadows was never their style. Body-worn cameras soon captured just how brazen they had become. In one routine stop, Edward Murphy, John Mangan and William Summerall were pulled over by police. Instead of complying, they turned the moment into a display. They pulled out their phones and began recording. The men surrounded the officer and shouted abuse, calling him a rat and a fat mutt. Their voices carried across the street, attracting onlookers, as if humiliating the police in public could somehow place them above the law. Murphy barked at the officer to get back in his car. Summerall refused orders to stand still, pacing aggressively, shouting over every attempt at explanation. The tactic was calculated: film the confrontation, drown it in abuse and project dominance. For them, it was theatre. For the officer, it was another reminder of how brazen these men had become. But the most dangerous confrontation came in February 2016. Police moved in on Summerall, who had taken to hiding drugs and weapons in an old club building on Townsend Lane. As officers surrounded the property, Summerall scrambled onto the roof in a desperate attempt to evade capture. From the street, a makeshift firebomb was thrown at police. 4 officers were caught in the flames, their uniforms and gear set alight. It was no longer about drugs, it was open hostility, a direct challenge to the police. For detectives, these clashes proved what locals already knew. The gang's arrogance and their attempts to intimidate even uniformed officers made them a serious threat. Each insult, each rooftop escape, each attack on police added to the growing case against them. By 2016 to 2017, Merseyside police had already amassed a significant dossier on the Anfield gang through long-standing detective work. Teams had trailed vehicles late into the night, logged addresses visited by suspected couriers, and quietly watched patterns of behavior up and down motorways. Every journey, every exchange, every late-night visitor was recorded and compiled. Stash houses were identified, detectives noted elevators of movement, individuals arriving with packages, staying briefly, and departing with new ones. Surveillance units discreetly monitored houses and flats in Merseyside and across Lancashire, recording cars arriving at odd hours, occupants carrying suitcases or bags, and men switching vehicles at service stations to avoid attention. Mobile phone data, call logs, cell site records provided connections between suspects and locations. Financial records, cash deposits, money flow, and expenditure were scrutinized to trace profits back to key players. When detectives were satisfied the network was mapped, they coordinated with the Crown Prosecution Service to secure warrants. On organised dates, simultaneous raids struck across Merseyside and in outlying towns. Search teams entered properties, searching for hard evidence. In one raid, officers found large sums of cash hidden in drawers and suitcases, proceeds ready to be laundered. Another seized cutting agents, mixing powders used to dilute pure cocaine into street-grade products. In a flat, investigators uncovered scales dusted with residue, alongside notebooks showing names, debts, addresses, and transaction amounts. These tick lists confirmed what detectives had long suspected about how money and drugs circulated. Weapons were also collected: knives, blunt instruments, and in some cases, imitation firearms used for intimidation. Phones and SIMS were seized and forensically imaged. Analysts extracted call records and messaging metadata, linking suspects to each other and to specific supply runs. Each raid chipped away at the infrastructure. Safe houses were shut down, stockpiles destroyed, routes interrupted. After a full year of surveillance and enforcement coordination, the physical backbone of the gang's operation was dismantled. What had once seemed untouchable became a series of shuttered addresses, seized evidence, and prosecution-ready files. The path to court was now clear. By September 2017, the work of Operation Scarver reached its conclusion inside Liverpool Crown Court. 19 men were finally brought before a judge. The evidence against them was overwhelming. At the top of the network, the sentences were clear and consistent. Edward Murphy, named as a central figure, was handed 11 years and 4 months. The same term was given to Jamie Jarvis and Stephen Harrison, both described as senior organisers in the conspiracy. The supplier Francis Fearon was also jailed for 11 years and 4 months. John Mangan, captured on body-worn cameras abusing officers, was sentenced to 8 years and 8 months. William Summerall received 7 years and 8 months. Others who played key roles in moving and distributing the drugs were dealt with firmly. Jamie Gray and Mark Forster were each sentenced to 6 years and 8 months, as were Walter Corran, Liam Dickinson, and James Tyrrell. Stephen Gandy and Lewis Aspinwall were both jailed for 6 years, alongside Francis Usher, who received the same. Lower-level couriers and facilitators were also punished. Eddie Hamilton and Ricky Doran received 5 years each. Abeid Jamil was jailed for 4 years and 9 months, while Callum Armitage received 4 years. Ataf Ali was given 6 years for his role. 2 teenagers, both just 16 when arrested, were dealt with differently. One received a 12-month referral order, the other a youth rehabilitation order with a curfew. Even here, the court made clear, age did not excuse their involvement. Together, the 19 men were sentenced to a combined total of more than 135 years. In October 2013, Dutch police moved in on a small bar in Rotterdam known as Café de Ketel. To anyone walking past, it looked like an ordinary neighbourhood pub. In reality, it was a closed-door hub for Europe's most serious drug traffickers. Entry was controlled by a buzzer system. Only trusted faces were allowed inside. What officers found confirmed long-held suspicions. Hidden behind the cafe's doors was a meeting point where international suppliers and European buyers came together. Inside, investigators recovered handguns, radio scanners, and a cash counting machine, tools of an operation that went far beyond casual smuggling. This was cartel business, negotiations over routes, financing, and shipments of cocaine destined for Britain, and Rotterdam's port, one of the busiest in Europe, was the gateway. The raid brought two names to the forefront of the investigation: Michael Mugen and Robert Gerard, both from Liverpool. Intelligence linked them directly to the cafe and to the conspiracies being discussed within its walls. Detectives believed they were using the venue to cement ties with South American cartels, to negotiate prices, and to arrange the transport of multi-million-pound consignments. The plans revealed at Café de Ketel were vast. Investigators described them as commercial-scale trafficking conspiracies, involving shipments measured in hundreds of kilos. Mugen himself told contacts that consignments could be hidden inside legitimate cargo, particularly meat imports from Argentina. The technique was simple but effective. Conceal cocaine within ordinary trade, push it through the chaos of a busy port, and extract it once containers cleared inspection. Prosecutors later characterized the conspiracy as worth at least £60 million. What made the operation so dangerous was its financial capacity. The conspirators had access to very large sums, often hundreds of thousands of euros in cash. This allowed them to purchase consignments outright, reducing supplier risk and guaranteeing repeated shipments. Corruption and secrecy reinforced the plan. Investigators learned that bribes to port staff were discussed as a way to guarantee safe passage for containers. At the same time, encrypted communications, secure PGP devices and specialist handsets were used to arrange logistics and disguise the true meaning of messages. To outsiders, conversations looked ordinary, but to insiders, they revealed the details of international shipments. For the National Crime Agency and their Dutch counterparts, Café de Ketel was more than just a cafe. It was the living proof of how organized crime operated across borders. South American cartels supplying Europe, Rotterdam as the entry point, and Liverpool traffickers like Mugen and Gerard arranging the flow of drugs into the UK. When Dutch police stormed Café de Ketel in October 2013, several suspects were arrested on the spot. Others slipped away. Among them were Robert Gerard and Michael Mugen. Both knew what was coming if they stayed. Within days, they were gone. Gerard, then in his early 50s and already familiar with law enforcement, disappeared into mainland Europe. This time, the allegations were even heavier. He was accused of playing a direct role in negotiating cocaine shipments worth millions. His name and photograph quickly featured in Operation Capturer and Operation Return, high-profile most wanted campaigns by the National Crime Agency and Crime Stoppers aimed at fugitives hiding abroad. Mugen from Croxteth in Liverpool was in his 30s when he went to ground. Detectives said he was closely tied to the Rotterdam plot and was wanted for conspiracy to import cocaine. For years, his name remained on the NCA's list of most wanted fugitives. Intelligence placed him in the Netherlands, where he was thought to be using false identities. We will talk about him in a few minutes. Each appeal from the NCA named him alongside Gerard, stressing them as a central role in between UK buyers and South American suppliers. For Gerard, the pressure eventually became too much. In October 2016, 3 years after the Rotterdam raid, his solicitor arranged for him to hand himself in at Manchester's Central Park police station. He told officers that life as a fugitive had become unbearable. He was charged with conspiracy to import cocaine and, within months, pleaded guilty. By 2017, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. Mugen, however, stayed hidden. While his associate began serving time, he remained one of Liverpool's most wanted men, a fugitive with direct ties to an international cartel pipeline. His absence kept the case alive, ensuring his name stayed in headlines long after the cafe raid itself had faded. For investigators, tracking Michael Mugen was never simple. He had access to fake passports and multiple aliases, which allowed him to cross borders and establish new identities. Intelligence reports suggested he moved through Europe, using criminal contacts to stay hidden. At times, he surfaced in the Netherlands, still close to the networks that had shaped the conspiracy. Years later, traces pointed further afield. Mugen is believed to have spent time in Dubai, a city increasingly used by traffickers as a safe haven, a place where money flowed easily and where identity papers could be forged or bought. From there, he was thought to move between other countries in the Middle East and Europe, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned down. The National Crime Agency, working alongside Dutch counterparts, refused to let the case go cold. Mugen's name and image appeared on international most wanted campaigns, circulated across the UK and the Netherlands as a high-value target. Even while he was in hiding, surveillance pressure mounted. NCA officers, with the support of Dutch police, followed up on leads across Europe. They tracked financial transactions, monitored known associates, and flagged suspicious travel records. Mugen's ability to remain at large for nearly a decade only underscored the level of resources at his disposal. But every year on the run added pressure. Gerard had already handed himself in. But for Mugen, the walls were slowly closing in. Wherever he went, Amsterdam, Dubai, or beyond, law enforcement was never far behind. By 2021, Michael Mugen had been a fugitive for almost 8 years. Leads pointed to Dubai, where investigators believed he had been moving between properties under false identities. That year, the breakthrough came. Working with the Dubai police, the NCA tracked Mugen's movements and coordinated a plan to bring him in. In April 2021, officers in Dubai arrested him. The capture marked the end of nearly a decade in hiding and removed one of the last men still wanted over the Café de Ketel conspiracy. For law enforcement, the arrest in Dubai was not just about one man. It was proof that fugitives, no matter how far they ran, could still be found. What followed was a complex process of extradition. Mugen was held in custody in the United Arab Emirates, while arrangements were made to return him to Britain. Under the supervision of NCA officers, he was flown back to the UK to face trial. For detectives who had pursued him since 2013, it was the conclusion of one of their longest manhunts. In 2023, Michael Mugen finally stood in the dock at Manchester Crown Court. Confronted with the evidence from the Café de Ketel investigation, he admitted conspiring to import Class A drugs. The prosecution outlined how he had been central to the plan and the use of encrypted phones to shield his movements. When the sentence was passed, the weight of his years on the run was clear. Mugen's case stood as proof that international conspiracies, built on secrecy and intimidation, could still be brought down. His empire never reached the heights he had planned. And in the end, the years spent in hiding only delayed the inevitable. Mugen was jailed for 12 years, a term that reflected both the scale of the conspiracy and his determination to avoid capture for so long. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK Crime Documentaries.